You're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon. Responsible Statecraft has an interesting piece entitled "The Middle East is Once Again West Asia. Shifting regional dynamics require the reconsideration and adjustment of long-standing American policies." For insight into this, let's turn to my next guest. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moores Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. He's one of the most prolific writers of our time. His latest book is entitled "Revolting Capital: Racism and Radicalism in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000. Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
Names make a difference. Those who confer them reveal their perspectives on the places and peoples they are naming. Over the courses of the 16th to 19th centuries, Europeans conquered and colonized the world, imposing their self-centered perspectives on its geography. For them, the Ottoman Empire was the Near East, a region encompassing West Asia, Southeast Europe, and Northeast Africa. And I say, Dr. Horne, one's ability to define something is directly related to one's ability to control it. And also, there's a difference between a geographic description and a description that is constructed for political reasons. Your thoughts on this, Dr. Gerald Horne?
Well, I think that article also reflects in a unique kind of way, an indirect kind of way, the continuing influence of British imperialism upon U.S. imperialism. What I mean is referring to this region that incorporates countries from Israel to Egypt to perhaps even Iran is a reflection of the perspective from London, that looking out of the window from Whitehall, they saw that going east would lead you in the near sense to Turkey, and then the middle sense to that territory I just designated, and to the further sense all the way to China and Japan. But it also reflects the current preoccupation of U.S. imperialism, which stretches back decades, perhaps to the end of the 19th century, when the idea was floated as U.S. imperialism was beginning to spread its wings, that in the geopolitical sense, it was extremely important to control what was called the world island. The world island is the area stretching from Japan and the Korean Peninsula on the east to Portugal and Spain on the west. That's why the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 was such a wounding and grievous blow to U.S. imperialism, because it disrupted that malevolent scheme of controlling the world by controlling the world island. And that is also why today, as we speak, there is growing concern about the rise of the People's Republic of China, which will be represented this weekend, when at Camp David, you witnessed the spectacle of Mr. Biden meeting with the leaders of Japan and South Korea in a flailing effort to contain not only China, but also the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And the fact that with the Belt and Road Initiative of China, which is this monumental effort to spend billions, perhaps trillions, on infrastructure, you now see trains rumbling from the east coast of China all the way to the furthest reaches of Western Europe, including the Iberian Peninsula, meaning Spain and Portugal. This helps knit together a common marketplace that conspicuously excludes U.S. imperialism, which is why Washington has worked overtime to disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative and further to disrupt the People's Republic of China. And this also sheds light on why in the 20th century, during the era of the so-called Cold War, you had actual hot wars erupting on the world island, not only on the Korean Peninsula between 1950 and 1953, the region we call Indochina, speaking of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, culminating in a loss by U.S. imperialism in 1975, then followed by the attempt to destabilize a regime in Kabul, Afghanistan, sympathetic to Moscow, beginning in the late 1970s under Jimmy Carter, the attack on Iraq, also part of the world island, also supposedly part of the Middle East, the attack that ultimately was a mortal blow to the pretensions of U.S. imperialism, and also underscores the importance of Israel in this scheme, because Israel, in many ways, is an unsinkable aircraft carrier on the outer reaches of the world island. And that is why this attempt by Netanyahu and his right-wing cronies to further entrench right-wing, ultra-right-wing rule in Israel has been so disruptive to the plans of U.S. imperialism, which has caused Mr. Netanyahu not to visit the White House, at least not as of yet.
And this whole idea, the Middle East is once again West Asia. How does that factor into what's going on right now in Niger and the Western African struggle against neocolonialism?
Well, I think it has everything to do with Niger, because as we've said more than once on these airwaves, this escapade in Ukraine has led to a disruption in the smooth flow of energy supplies, not only natural gas from Russia into Western Europe, not only the question of oil that oftentimes was flowing from Russia into Western Europe, but also uranium. And there, of course, enters Niger, because with the attempt, thus far unsuccessful, to boycott Russian uranium, that jeopardizes uranium supplies, and Niger attains ever more prominence. But I should also continue with the previous point, which is that the development of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as its name suggests, China plays a major role, but so does Russia. It is seen as a counterpoint to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It has co-opted Iran as well into its ranks. The cooperation between Russia and Iran is now notorious. That, too, jeopardizes the attempt by U.S. imperialism to control what they call the world island. And it also helps to underscore and illustrate the importance of Iran for their geopolitical crusade.
And as we look at if we understand the longer a government is allowed to exist post-coup, that the stronger they become. What do we see? Are we looking at weeks? How is the U.S. going to respond to this in the context of Burkina Faso saying they support Niger, Mali saying they support Niger, Algeria saying the same? What are we looking at, or what can we expect to see on the horizon within the next few weeks? Because again, the longer this drags on, I would say, the stronger the coup government becomes.
Well, I would urge our audience to keep a close eye on the Sahel and Africa, because we may be in the midst of another pivot by U.S. imperialism. Recall that in the late 1970s, as noted, U.S. imperialism helped to boost the fortunes of religious zealots, including the man presumably now in his grave, known as Osama bin Laden. And I've been paying careful and close attention to these stories coming out of Niger and also out of Burkina Faso and Mali, that there has been a surge in violence inflicted by religious zealots. Do not be surprised if Washington, which has told us that it is a sworn foe of so-called Islamic fundamentalism, begins to cooperate, at least in the short term, with these so-called religious zealots in order to destabilize what is seen to be the wider foe, the larger foe So, speaking of these militarized regimes in the Sahel, obviously, this could be highly provocative, quite dangerous, perhaps even to the security of the United States of America. And I don't think we should rule out a military intervention by Nigeria and its comrades in the economic community of West African states. If you look at Nigerian media, you see pictures of armed personnel carriers being offloaded in ports in Nigeria, presumably from the North Atlantic nations. There is going to be a meeting in Ghana Thursday and perhaps Friday too, of military chiefs from ECOWAS putting their heads together, presumably to sketch out a plan to invade Niger. So this cannot be ruled out. And certainly we should raise ever louder the cry, hands off Niger.
Responsible Statecraft has a piece. It's been 70 years since the CIA-assisted coup in Iran. There's an awful lot to be learned, I would say, from the rationale that the United States put together as they overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh, as well as the long-lasting ramifications of such action. I have said that we can trace a lot of this quote-unquote Islamic resistance or Islamic quote-unquote terrorism back to that coup.
Well, it's interesting to note as well that the Islamic Republic of Iran has extended the hand of cooperation to many Black Americans. Some in the DMV, the District of Maryland and Virginia, may be familiar with the Black American once known as David Belfield, who began to cooperate with the newly installed Iranian revolutionaries post-1979, and in fact, carried out some operations in the DMV on their behalf and then escaped to Iran, where he's become an actor. I would point you to the movie Kandahar, for example. But more than that, Iran looms large on the imperialist landscape because it is a major producer of oil and, of course, natural gas as well, which once again brings us back to the escapade in Ukraine, the attempt to curtail exports of energy from Russia, which makes the importance of energy from Iran all the more important. And then, of course, that points to the recent deal negotiated by Mr. Biden, whereby Iranian prisoners in this country are being traded for those in prison in Iran, and $6 billion in Iranian dollars that had been frozen are being returned to the regime. This is an attempt to wean the Iranian regime to the bosom of U.S. imperialism, but I dare say that it too will fail.
And Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you.